everybody's doing well and safe. Um, we we have to continue praying for the world and for the country and for the church. Continue praying for each other that God will keep everybody safe in this perilous times. We don't know what will happen next, but we hope that um, everybody is in God's hands, and we know that it's our faith. It's not our hope. It's our faith that we know that everybody's in God's hands. We just have to manage those times with carefulness and with prayer, as our duty as Christians, to pray for the church and for the world and for every family and every person, as we hear about the numbers rising and there is almost a second wave of infection coming. So we continue to pray, and now we continue to study the book that we have decided to look into for the Bible study, the last hours of Jesus, and we actually are at chapter 17. I'm actually chapter 18, Calvary. We finished chapter 17. One piece from chapter 17 that I missed last time. We said that Jesus took the cross, usually the cross beam, carried it on his shoulder all the way to Calvary. And he went from the castle of Antonia through the streets of Jerusalem to at the gate, what we call Ephraim Gate. Ephraim Gate is the gate that starts a road from Jerusalem to Jaffa and by the sea. It's a busy road where people come and go. It's a busy gate. And then they stopped a little bit to the north of this road, maybe 100 or 200 yards to the north, where there is a little hill. It's maybe they say it's 15 feet high, and the hill is called Calvary. Why is it called Calvary? That's what we're going to start today by describing this. But before he gets out of the gate of the Ephraim Gate. We saw that our Lord was very weakened by the scourging and by the bleeding and by the severe depression and the emotional struggle that he had the night before. Add to that, he had not eaten or drank anything, and he was dehydrated from the bleeding and from the sweat. So before he goes through the gate, he had fallen maybe a few times, and they picked a man. His name is Simeon of Cyrene, or Simon of Cyrene, and he carried the cross, and we spoke about this man briefly last time. But what I missed to tell you, there was a group of women crying and wailing as before Jesus, crossed that gate. And apparently, the writer of the book says, because the Lord was relieved of the burden of the beam, now he could lift up his neck and head and look around. So he saw the women with the beam, the cross beam, weighing more than 75 pounds, maybe 75 to 100 pounds. It's a heavy weight to be carried by a weakened person. So he's bent under the weight of the cross. But this moment when they took the cross off his shoulders, he was able to lift up his head and look around. When he looked around, he saw the women of Jerusalem. He called them daughters of Jerusalem, crying and wailing for him. And he said to them, this is the first time the Lord spoke in a very long while. And it shows his concern for people. He's concerned for others. He said, do not cry for me, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children, because the day will come when they would say, blessed are the wombs that did not carry children and the breasts that didn't nurse. If they had done this to the green stick, the green is him. Usually green sticks people don't abuse. They let them live so they can bring fruit. But the dry ones, usually they're one that get burned and broken and used. So he said if they had done that to the green stick, what would they do to the dry one? And he was forecasting what will happen on 70 AD when Jerusalem would be besieged by the Roman army, and there will be a great massacre of the Jews in Jerusalem and in Judea. And the historian recorded it was one of the most horrible things happened in history. And we'll talk about it again today at the end of talking about Calvary. So he lifted up his head and spoke to the women of Jerusalem, and apparently those women will follow him and join, most probably, the Galilean friends of the Lord at the foot of the cross. So today we are going to the chapter 18, which speaks about Calvary. The name Calvary, that's how we begin with it. Calvary is the Greek name, and Hebrew, it's Golgotha. And actually the Greek called Ekranion. Cranium comes from cranium, the skull, the head. And Golgotha is the same thing, the skull. Both words have the same meaning, the skull. So that local place, it's not a mountain or mountains, but the name Calvary or Golgotha refers to an area wider than the spot where the cross of Christ was planted. So this is a bigger area, not a huge place, but it's a bigger area than where the spot of the cross. So the words mean skull. So St. John tells us a little bit about a place. He says, and the place where the Lord was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden was a new tomb. So Joseph of Arimathea most probably had an estate in that place where he built for himself a tomb. It was for him, so there was nobody buried in it. He most probably was a very rich man. So the name Calvary is not the name of the spot where Jesus was crucified. It's the name of the area, the general name of the area. So where was that? There's some assumptions, and some of them are basically wrong, obviously wrong. One assumption is the name was given to that area, Calvary, the skull, because of the skulls of the people who got executed there. This is unthinkable because the Jews will never allow of bones to be scattered on the ground. This would render this place defiled, so they cannot really pass by that place. They will not allow that. They had to be buried. So there's another thought. So it is not the skulls that was on the ground. That's not possible from the Jewish standpoint. The other thought came from the fathers of the church. Some of them said it's because Adam's skull was buried there. Again, this is mere presumption. There is no history or archaeology or even tradition that support that thought. The fathers merely made that assumption based on symbolic interpretation. So they said it had to be the skull of Adam. And then when you go to Jerusalem and visit the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and you visit the place of the cross, they will show you some place where the crack leads to the skull of Adam. You don't see his skulls, but it's all assumption. In the area in Israel, places were named most probably by their shape. So they name a place shoulder or belly or leg or skull, most probably because there is something in that place that looked like a body part. Nearby, the hill looked at the place nearby where the spot of Calvary is traditionally. There is a hill that looked like a skull. I'm not sure if it is the same. I'm going to share with you something from the internet. The place, they call it Gordon's Calvary. Gordon's Calvary is suggested by someone who had made some studies And I wanted to prepare this beforehand, but the tab was not ready. So let me try to search it on the internet. It's called Gordon's. I'm not sure if it is the same or something different, but it's something looks like this. Gordon's Calvary. So this is how it looks, and they call that skull. So if you look at it, that's how it looks. Looks like the cavity of two eyes and a broken nose. Looks like a skull. So most probably something looked like that, made the place be named the skull. That's what the writer of the book would say. But the problem is Gordon also referred to another place nearby that shape as the tomb. So they called Gordon's tomb also. On any case, the reason why it was called Golgotha, or the skull, is because of the shape of the hill. The hill sloped gradually in the southeastern direction, but maybe sharply in the northwestern. Maybe about 100 yards before the walls, a little rocky projection or hilltop of no great dimensions, a small one. And this is where we saw that picture. It could be that place where it looked like a skull. It's not a very high hill. They said 15 feet total. And I'm sure there was a gradual incline on one side that they could lead the condemned persons, the three, on that sloping gradual incline to the top of it. Now, St. John and the book of Acts, and then the reference they said, and the letter to the Hebrews said that Jesus was crucified outside the walls, outside the city. So definitely the walls of Jerusalem from excavations of the first century was beneath or before that piece. The piece was outside, that Golgotha piece was outside the walls. Then the New Jerusalem actually today include that piece, the Church of the Sepulchre, the Holy Sepulchre, and Calvary is included in the wall. It's within the city, but in the first century it was not. Calvary was on the road that, like I said, it reads from the Ephraim gate to Jaffa. The gospel do not provide us with the exact location of Calvary. That's something outside the walls of the city. It was a near highway, that's what the gospels would say. So people who are coming on the highway will be looking and seeing the cross. They can really clearly see it. And it was meant this way, like we said, the Romans wanted their condemned people to the crucifixion to be like a scene, something that people, as many people as possible, can see it. So that when they came by, we saw that in the Gospel of St. Matthew, the people the passers-by insulted Christ. They looked at him and they saw the sign that Pilate had put, and they started to insult him. That's why it was in this very busy highway. So someone who is someone, his name is Père Vincent of the École Biblique in Jerusalem, one of the greatest of the Palestinian archaeologists, said that the authenticity of Calvary and the Holy Sepulchre is endowed with the best guarantee of certitude which one can hope for in such a subject. He's saying because I asked the same thing to the tour guide who took us through Jerusalem and the Holy Sepulchre, and I said, how, because we went through the places, the Via Dolorosa and stuff, and he used to say, this is not the original place, this is not the original. So when I came to the tomb, I said, is this the original place? He says, yes, without doubt. We all the guides know that one of the most sure places as authentic is the tomb of Christ. The place where the Holy Sepulchre is the most authentic. And here, the person that expert from the L'École Publique is confirming this. Says there's not too many places who have this surety. So from the visitor place today, if you go to visit the Holy Sepulchre, I want to go and share with you something about the church and where we have the scene today. Those of us who went will understand what I'm talking about. It is very much inside the city. It's really difficult to say that this place was out. So the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, that's what we're looking for. So this is what it looks like today. So we're going to get the images. There is a 3D. So this is where you stand in the outside court. This is how it looks. You get to see the door. That's the door where you go in, and the church dome is in that corner. Beyond that, you go inside, and here's another picture. This is in the time of the Saturday of Light, and you see how the road's coming in and out from that place. That's from the other side. This is inside. So this little structure in the inside is the tomb of the Lord. If you go look to the left, there's a little canopy awning. That little canopy on the left side is the Coptic altar. So this actually is the place where the head was. And there's the monk that stands on the left side. This usually is either a Coptic monk or a Syriac monk. The Syriac church is on that side. The Greeks come to the other side. This is it. Now, this is the church of the cross of the Holy Sepulchre, of Golgotha. And if you look at the altar there, under the altar is the rock where they believe, or the place where the cross was. And this is in an elevated place over the Church of the Cross, or the Church of the Golgotha is a little bit higher than the Church of the tomb, the sepulchre. It will be looking down at the tomb. Here is the tomb again, and this is a view from the outside. The big dome is where the tomb is. The entrance is on the nearer to you, and the little dome is the Church of Golgotha, the place of the cross. So the place of the cross is one place, and the tomb is another place a little bit down. But you can see it's clearly inside the city today. It's very difficult when you go visit and to imagine this was outside the walls of Jerusalem. And Jesus was in the spot where the brown dome is on the cross, looking to the south. And this is looking at the tomb from the top. And this is from the west side, looking inside. Is when you go inside there, on the right side, there is the platform or the marble piece that was that's there to commemorate the placing of the body of Christ. Okay. There is a 3D program that you can go on and actually take a tour of all the places there. It's a very beautiful program. If you want, you can go there and look it up on the internet. It's a 3D tour of the Church of the Sepulchre and the Church of Golgotha. Knowing that Calvary was outside the wall, it's difficult for a visitor, like I said, to imagine that. So when was the second wall built? It was built in the time of King Ezekiah, and was restored and rebuilt in later places. So it includes the traditional site of Calvary. So in the first century, it was outside. It was the time of King Agrippa, Herod Agrippa, in the time of St. Paul, that he started adding that piece to the city. So it is incredible that the early Christians should forget or ignore the place where Jesus was crucified and buried. So when people say they have doubts about the places where Jesus was buried or crucified, it's really hard to think that the Christians would forget that place or even ignore it and forget about it. So the tradition has to be very strong about it. Maybe the place of birth, maybe the place of, but to ignore the place where Jesus was crucified and entombed, it's unthinkable. So they used to visit that place, and we have tradition about St. Mary when she was in Jerusalem, going there every morning, early morning, and praying. That's very traditional. And all the traditional churches, they have that tradition that the early Christians, including the Virgin herself, had to visit the place of the entombment of Christ and pray there and worship there. One of the obstacles would be what happened at 70 AD when the Roman army besieged the city and destroyed many places, and how the Christians ran out of the city. So they did, and they, being warned by Christ, who told them, when you see Jerusalem besieged, don't stay, just leave. And they all left, and the big congregation of the Christians went to a place in Jordan. Its name is Pella. And I want you to see this place because Christians in Jerusalem fled the city and went to Pella. Pella is a Greek name given to a city that Alexander the Great was born in, Pella in Jordan. This is the name of the city. I would give it Jordan. And images. This is where it is in Jordan. This. In the center of this map. So you see where Jerusalem is. It's on the eastern side of the Jordan in the kingdom of Jordan today. And Pella is a town or a city of great archaeological significance, where the Christian, the Jerusalemite Christians fled during the Roman siege of Jerusalem. And there they had their own churches, and they had spent time there. And there's lots of excavations in Pella, as you see the images, shows temples, churches, and this is a Byzantine church from the 4th century. And there's many churches in the city. It kept as a sanctuary for the Christians. So this is Pella. When they came back from Pella after the Roman anger had subsided, they had returned to Jerusalem, to the same places they knew, and they continued the tradition of worshiping at the sepulcher of the Lord. Then again, in 132, 70 is where the first revolt. Then again, a revolt again in the time of Hadrian, the emperor, who in 132 there was a big disciplining of Judea. So Hadrian especially, was so angry with the Jews that he did not really differentiate between Jews and Christians. So what did he do? He got so angry and he decided to wipe out their religion. So he would knock down the temple, would knock down anything to do with, or the synagogues and the churches, and completely erase everything that is Jewish, and with it Christian too. So what did he do? He destroyed Jerusalem and turned it into ruin. And upon it, he built a Roman city called Aelia Capirolina, yeah. Aelia Capirolina. His engineers selected Calvary as a site of the forum and the capital of the new city. And to create a level platform to build on it, he filled the depressions in this hill, between the hill and the wall, with trash and debris. This is where you have it in our Synaxarium, that the Calvary was covered with trash. And in the history, it was the Romans, not the Jews, who did this. And on top of the Calvary hill, he erected a statue of Jupiter over the Holy Sepulchre, and a statue of Venus over the spot where Christ was crucified. His attention was undoubtedly directed to these spots because of their religious associations. Of course, he knew these are very important places, which tells us that these places were known. It's not something that would be forgotten. So this is what Hadrian had done. He didn't really differentiate between Christians and Jews. He thought Christians were part of Jewish religion, a sect of the Jew, like the book of Acts would call it, this new sect. And every place in the Roman Empire was known as the Jewish sect. And he did the same thing to many of the holy places of the Jews. They found idolatrous statues among the temple ruins at the Terebinth of Abraham, the place where the Jews venerate their great patriarch Abraham. And he built, to prevent Christians from honoring the place at Bethlehem, he built a shrine to Adonis over the sacred grotto. So what Hadrian had been doing is trying to eradicate everything that to do with Christ and to do with religion in Jerusalem. Did the opposite, because where those places were, where he put his statues, it's actually acted like a lasting mark for the places where Christ was crucified and buried. It did the opposite. When peace came to the church in the time of Constantine in 326, and you know the story of Queen Helena. He's not bringing it in the book, but we know that she went to discover the cross and to build a church dedicated to the cross and the tomb. The Christians in Jerusalem pointed out to those places as the known places of the cross and the burial in 326, and they had to remove all the dirt and the debris that Hadrian had put there. What Constantine did, to us, he did something good and something bad. What he did bad is that he changed the place a little bit. So he cut that hill, the Calvary hill, into a cube to make the top of it a place for a basilica. And what did he do? He took the cave where Jesus' tomb was. So he ordered his workmen to cut the shell. The cave is like this. where the tomb of Christ is in the bottom, they cut it. And they took this top part and they cut it into pieces and moved it to Rome. And they left the bottom with the cave, with the bottom of the cave with the tomb in it. And on top of this structure, he built a huge basilica that we see today that was renovated a few times. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre that you see with the pillars around, that rounded structure with the tomb in the middle. And then outside that, he made a very beautiful court with pillars and left a small piece for the place where the cross is, where a beautiful church was built on top of it. It had magnificent porches. The spot Jesus was crucified was at the southeast angle of the court. Constantine cut the rock of Calvary into the shape of a cube about 18 by 15 feet on the top. Later, both Calvary and the Holy Sepulchre were included under one roof as they are today. Like we saw in the images, there are two domes, but it's the same structure, the same space underneath. So this is Calvary, and how did it go from the place outside the walls to become part of the city and to have the church built on top of it by Constantine. Now let's talk about crucifixion itself. It's a painful study, something that would hurt. So who invented the crucifixion? Believe it or not, and I know the Armenian will be amused by this. Believe it or not, the crucifixion was invented by the Persians. They are the first to crucify people. Some Persian person with a very, I can't tell you, a very twisted mind imagined how to kill a person slowly and not to let them die until they squeeze the last drop of pain out of them. And it would take days. Who learned from the Persians? The first to learn from the Persians were the Greeks. And then from the Persians also learned the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians are the ones in the west, northwest Africa, from Libya all the way to Morocco. That's Carthage. And from the Carthaginians, the Romans learned. So the Romans are the students of the students in the crucifixion, but it became a standard procedure in the Roman Empire to use the crucifixion for the highest crimes and the lowest citizens, actually not the citizens, the lowest subordinates. There was a common thing to say that the Romans would never crucify a Roman, and you have Cicero speaking eloquently about that he would be very sad to learn that a Roman citizen would be scourged or called names, and he said, I would not know what words I should use if they would be crucified. But apparently this rule was broken many times in history. They used to crucify Roman citizens. And when the people were criticized, their governors were criticized for crucifying Roman citizens, they would do something different. Like one of them would hang a Roman citizen on a white cross that faces Italy, or would put like a special decoration on the cross or something to make it like, oh, so he's special, he has a special cross. For the Jews, the cross and the hanging anyone on something was especially disgusting because it was a sign of a curse. Because there is in Deuteronomy 21:23, Moses wrote, for he is accursed of God that hangs on a tree. This is why the enemies of Christ, actually, maybe explaining that, insisted that Jesus would be crucified, because they would prove to everybody that if God was really pleased with him, why would he die this way of death? But because he's accursed of God, that he is hung on a cross. St. Paul would use this actually, big time, when he spoke about Jesus hanging on the cross, especially in the letter to the Hebrews, when it says, let us get out of the city. He couldn't really crucify Jesus inside the city of Jerusalem. That would curse the whole city. So he had to go out of the city to be crucified. And St. Paul would say, let's go out to him to be accursed of the law, because he's giving us the greatest blessing by being outside the old law. So they said, if we can bring him to the cross, then this whole movement that he starts will be nipped in the bud, and nobody will really be interested in him. And this is also Galatians 3:13, where he says he was accursed. He was made a curse for us. So we become righteousness in him. So among the Romans, the cross was called the slave punishment. They call it supplicium servile, means the slave punishment. This was the punishment for runaway slaves or treacherous slaves or rebellious slaves or somebody in the army that deserted, highway robbery, sedition, or piracy, armed robbery, people who would go with arms to with swords and daggers to steal money. There is evidence that this was done to Romans, like I said. Romans have used crucifixion a great deal in the provinces, especially in the ones that has rebellions. And so with the Jews, they have done this a lot. And when a sedition broke out at the death of Herod the Great, that's 4 BC, when Herod the Great died, the Jews started a rebellion. It was suppressed by Quintilius Varus, the legate of Syria, the governor of Syria, who crucified 2,000 Jews in 4 BC. Tiberius Alexander, procurator of Judea, in 46, 48 later, maybe the one after Pilate, maybe the one after Pilate, crucified 2 sons of Judas of Galilee. And there's many of them. Josephus states that the numbers crucified by Procurator Felix, and this was in the time of St. Paul, was incalculable. The Procurator Gricius Florus, in 64 after him, scourged before his tribunal in Jerusalem and nailed to the cross Jews on whom had been bestowed the Roman dignity of the equestrian rank. During the siege of Jerusalem, this is the most significant. In the year 70, the Romans crucified as many as 500 captives a day. Every day they will crucify 500. Josephus tells us that the soldiers, out of rage and hatred, amused themselves by nailing their prisoners in different postures. And so great was their number that space could not be found for the crosses, nor crosses for the bodies. They couldn't find enough wood, nor places to put the crosses. What does the word cross mean? A word cross means a stake or a post. That's all what it means. It doesn't mean that plus sign. It means a pole, a stake, to which a person will be nailed or tied. The upright stake gave its name to the entire instrument of torture, which consisted of an upright stake and also a cross beam. In ordinary practice, the stake or vertical part of the cross was fixed in the ground and remained stationary there. But in the time of Christ, because of the Jews, they didn't want to leave that stake or pole in place because it's accursed. It's something that the Jews would not tolerate, especially on a Sabbath or when they're going to the temple. There were 2 types of crosses and the ordinary use. One was what we call it crux commissa. Crux commissa is a T-cross, like that. And the second type is the crux immissa. And the crux immissa has a little bit of the vertical beam higher than the horizontal one. So there's commissa and immissa. The writer of the book believed that the cross used to crucify the Lord was the latter one, the immissa, because we cannot be certain exactly which one. Is it commissa or immissa? But in the immissa, you have the vertical beam with a little bit of a socket. In the immissa, you have a socket cut, even in the little crosses we do. You look carefully, there is a little socket cut in that horizontal or the vertical beam, a little socket where the horizontal one fits in. So they have that socket. But the other one, you just don't have to do anything. You make the horizontal and then you stick it or nail it to the top. There's a strong evidence among ancient writers that was a peg or a hook. They call it the horn, like the unicorn horn, coming out at one place here somewhere. There's a hook that comes like that. So if you go from the side, it becomes like this. Of course, it's not proportionate with my finger. Why is that? They said because they knew if they hang the person without any support, they will die very quickly. So they give them something to stride on. So that would, when they hold the body on it, it does not. And we talked about this in the shroud, how there was a pushing up and down all the time. And the Romans knew this. This book was written before the great information on the shroud. So he was talking about this hook that was found in many crosses in the museums where they had the victim striding it so that he would not put his weight on the hands, otherwise it will be cut through. This peg was made the work of crucifixion easier to help supporting the weight of the body. It increased the suffering of the crucified by prolonging his life and preventing asphyxiation early. There is also the height of the cross varied considerably. There was the low cross, crux humilis, and the high crux, crux sublimis, the low and the high. So if we understand, we ask the question, was Jesus crucified on a low cross or a high cross? First of all, was he crucified on the T-shaped crux, the crux commissa, or the plus sign crux? I think they say most probably is on the T, on the plus sign, because there was a label that would have to be hung on top of him. How would they nail this on top of him if there was no more wood on top? So most probably he was crucified on the crux emissa, the plus sign. But what about the high or low? They said from St. John, when he was thirsty, when he said, I'm thirsty, a soldier ran and soaked a sponge in sour wine, and he put it on a spear and he lifted up to him. If it was on the low cross, he would have given it to him by hand. But the fact that he was on a high cross, he had to lift it up on a spear. Why they would crucify somebody on a low cross? To make him exposed, so the animals will come and deal with him. But the high cross is to show everybody who he is, so the crowd, when they gather, they cannot see a label when, or they see him when he's low. So you have to lift him up. So most probably Pilate has ordered him to be on a high cross, so that, and why would Pilate do this? Because he's going to have a sign in his mind. He's going to have his revenge somehow, and a sign he is the king of the Jews, to make a stab at the Sanhedrists, who humiliated him and threatened him. So as a kickback, he wanted him to be on a high cross so that everybody would see the king of the Jews and what he looks like. Was he naked?
Was Pilate, did he become a Christian and his wife later?
I don't think, the book doesn't say anything about him. It said that he was swallowed into oblivion in the end of his life. We don't have any information about him. Okay. It's very sad. Like Herod and Pilate, they end up exiled, both of them. We don't know where they're gone. So in the ancient writing, there are frequent documents of people being crucified naked. And was it completely naked or partially naked? Most of the time they were completely naked. But like I said, there was concessions made. When Jesus was scourged, they put on, after that, the gospel says that they put his clothes on again. So his procession during the cross, the Via Dolorosa, he was dressed. This is not typical of executed people. So most probably they left something like a loincloth to cover him, like the artists would do on their painting of Christ. And why is that? Most probably because of the Jews. The Romans very, very careful not to kind of stimulate the anger and invoke anger of their subordinates. It was a shameful death, and it was inflicted on the slaves and the most wicked criminals. That it had to be in that way, so that everybody would see the end of evil. So they would die painful death involving scourging, carrying the cross, long hours nailed to the cross, suffering from the wounds of the nails, weakness, thirst, suffocation, heat, and cold, constriction of the muscles. The muscles go into, after a while of being in that place, in the same position, the muscles goes into a very severe spasms. You know, when you get a cramp in a muscle, the whole body starts to convulse and spasm. It becomes pain everywhere. And gradual drop by drop loss of blood. Many ancient consider crucifixion the most shameful and the most painful form of death. When we go on to the death of Christ, once they moved after, and we'll go back to the Lord after he finished going through the gate, a little bit to the north, which is right side of those who will go out of the gate of Ephraim. It will be on the right side, that's north. And then on a few yards out, they found the hill of Calvary, where they prepared the three, was Jesus and two other criminals, and they will all be crucified together. One thing, sometimes you get an artist drawing Jesus tied to the cross with ropes. That's unheard of. This is not historically correct. And sometimes they put nails in Christ's hands and feet, but they tie the thieves. Again, that is not historically correct. They all had to be nailed. So immediately the soldiers took their clothes off. There's one of two possibilities. They either had the vertical beam already in the ground, ready, and they're going to nail the crucified to the horizontal beam by the hand, or they fixed the horizontal beam to the vertical beam on the ground like this, and they laid each of them on their cross, the whole cross. So if they do the first, this is the procedure. So they first get the horizontal beam, talking about the horizontal beam, and they put it on the ground. The vertical beam is in place. So there will be three soldiers, one marking the place where they're going to put the nail, and they have to have a hand drill to drill the hole. So because they cannot really hammer that nail with how much power you get, you cannot hammer it all the way in to the degree that it actually holds the body. So they drill a little bit, and they bring the hand on top of it, and the other two soldiers, one will hold the wrist and the hand open, and the other one will hammer the nail very sharply and quickly. They don't want any movement, so they have to do it extremely sharp and quick. And then in 2-3 hammers, he will get the nail in place. The other one, they go to the other side. Another one will hold the hand again and pull it as much as they can. So that one from Mel Gibson's version is true. They will mark the other place, and they pull the other hand as far as it can get to the other place, and they repeat the process. Now, if that's only they have the horizontal part, now they have two soldiers, one hold one side of the beam, one another side of the beam, another person will hold the crucified body, the person, and hold them tight, and they stand him up, and now they start lifting up with the beam. So sometimes they get a fork, something like this, and they hold the horizontal beam like this from both sides, and they lift it up, and the person would have to thread the body up as they go up all the way, and they push it against the horizontal beam so it can go into the socket. And when it goes in the socket, someone would go with with leather, and then nail the socket in place from the opposite side. And then now they have to nail the feet. So it is more difficult, the book writer says, more difficult to imagine 2 feet on top of each other. It's easier that they would do each feet alone. But the shroud shows us that actually the 2 feet were fixed on top of each other. They were not actually side by side. And whatever the case is, it will help them to have the body stride that little hook. We had no artistic visual, but it seems like historically that's what happened. Now, if they are going to do the whole cross, they will do the whole process on the ground, and then they would tilt the cross up like what Mel Gibson had showed, and then put it in the little hole they made in the rocky places, and they filled it with rocks and dirt to make it steady. The lifting up was the biggest deal in it, because they're afraid that the hands will cut through and will come down. They have to be very steady and very stable. And that's why it needs more than 2 soldiers, 3 at least. Jesus was crucified in the middle of 2 thieves. And why is that? You put the highest criminal, the worst of them, in the middle to get the highest attention. People usually look at the center. So, and he's a high cross in the center to be counted as the highest criminal among the wicked. To fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah, he was counted among the wicked, Isaiah 53. And the gospel writers were struck with that. St. Mark, for example, would say that was erected in the middle, and to them this was something to record. They didn't ignore it. To them it was something very striking, that Jesus, their Jesus, will be counted as the wickedest of all. So as soon as he has been attached firmly to the cross by his hands, a soldier raised another ladder to the front and nailed that little board, the title that was written in Aramaic, Greek, and Latin, that says, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. This was Pilate's way of getting back at the Sanhedrists. And then when they saw it, of course, some people who were Gentiles who came to the city were not Jews, made fun of the Jews, of course, when they saw that. Oh, look at your king. Oh, you deserved someone like that. Something like this. So the Sanhedrists got so angry when they saw that. And they sent a delegate from them to go back to Pilate and tell him, you know, don't write that. At least if you want to write something like this, say, this impostor said, I am the king of the Jews. And what did Pilate say? I'm not going to change that. You know, this is my time. Most probably with a hand wave, he did this. What I wrote, what I have written, I have written. You know, just get away from me. I don't want to see you again. I had enough of you today. So what did Jesus see from the cross? And this is how we're going to end this chapter. When Jesus looked from the cross, he saw the soldiers done with their crucifixion job. They're going to turn into their guarding job for fear that someone from his family or friends will come and take him down. So they are piling the clothes of the crucified people in a pile to prepare it for casting lots and see who's going to take what. And then sitting around with their spears and swords, talking and as if they're taking rest from their hard work. What did he see also? He saw he's looking south, and between the hillock and the highway, there was crowds of people. Some were angry because of the title, and some were angry because they believed him. And now the Sanhedrin had said that he is an impostor, he is a deceiver. They feel deceived by Jesus. They were angry at him. Some were indifferent. They really didn't care. So they've seen that too many times. They're about to go to their business. They're going to go through the gates. Some were curious. They've never seen anything like that before. Some were pleased, especially the Sanhedrin. Their job has been completed. Now, this is the end they wished for. But the other group, the fifth group, are Jesus' friends. And they were first a little bit far off, but then after everything settled, they could come and be at the foot of the cross. Many of them stood at a distance, probably out of fear for the soldiers. First among them was Saint Mary, the mother of Jesus. Then there were her sister, who was probably Salome. And the writer of the book, according to Catholic tradition, we don't have that very strong tradition that Salome was the mother of John and James. She's the mother of St. John. But she is the sister of St. Mary. And we could say that she's a sister or she's a cousin. We don't know exactly the relationship, but they all called sisters. If that's true, if she is the right sister, the direct sister, the full sister of St. Mary, then St. John is the cousin of Jesus. Also, so John will be the nephew of St. Mary. St. Mary Magdalene and Mary of Cleopas. Who is Cleopas? Most tradition would say that he was the brother of St. Joseph, a foster brother of Christ. So that St. Joseph, as the foster father of Christ, Cleopas was his brother. So that means that the children of Mary of Cleopas and Cleopas were the they would say the relatives, again, the brothers of Jesus through his uncle. Who else was there? Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, of course, St. John. There were undoubtedly others. St. Luke refers to the presence of all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee. And with those would be the women that Jesus called the daughters of Jerusalem. So St. Mark would say many other women who had come up with him to Jerusalem. We can be sure too that those whom Christ addressed as daughter of Jerusalem was there. So these are the friends of Christ. But how about the Bethany friends? Martha and Lazarus and Mary. The writer would say, and I would agree, they would have to be there. Simon the leper, whom he had him in his house. So many of the people that Jesus healed, the deaf and the blind and the lepers. So what did Jesus also see? He saw the nearby Ephraim gate. As he's facing the road, he can tilt his head to the right and left. From the people that went through the gate, there was every kind of people: Jew, Gentile, proselyte and pagan, Greek and Roman, men and women and children, soldiers and merchants, businessmen, pilgrims, government officials. Some were on foot, others rode donkeys, horses, or camels, an occasional litter or chariot bearing wealthy or important person. Some stopped to stare and then join with the Jews in mocking and reviling Jesus. Others, hardened to sights of this kind, oblivious to the tremendous mystery being enacted on that roadside, glanced up and then passed on indifferent. Jesus spoke to none of them. He didn't say anything. Because he was on a high cross, on a hill rock, his head must have been at the height of the city walls, scarcely 100 yards away. He just came out of the gate. He was crucified facing the road. His head was at the level of the city walls, looking at the south. Directly before him was the highway, the moat, and the city. Moat was a little bit of a ditch to protect the wall. And beyond the wall, there was the hill of the city with its elegant residences, dominated the great towers of the palace of Herod to the right. Out beyond there was the hill sloped southward, and therefore out of sight was the house where he had eaten the Last Supper with his apostles. Near to it was the house of Caiaphas, where he had been condemned by the Sanhedrin. When Jesus looked to his left, he could see the Ephraim gate, where he came through. Near the angle where the walls met, and raising his eyes, he could see the towers of the Antonia, and a little to the south, the pinnacle of the temple. He could see that because they're higher than the wall. Out beyond the city and sloping toward the east upwards is the mountain of Olives. where it leads to Bethany. So this was the Calvary chapter. And I hope I didn't stress your emotions very hard, but there's more information about the places and the process and the time and the history rather than about hurting emotions. But it's good again, like I said, it's good again to keep ourselves in the scene and to meditate on it and to immerse ourselves, because this is how Jesus loved us. If we want to experience his love, would be at best in Calvary. Any questions? Any inquisition? All right. Let's say our Father. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, make us worthy, O Lord, to say thankfully, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. In Christ Jesus our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory now forever. Amen. May the love of God the Father and grace of his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you. Whoever desires to live in peace, peace be with you. Good night.